Right now, in the room you're sitting in, at this exact second, a signal moving at the speed of light is chasing something that left Earth before most of your parents finished high school. It has been falling away from us for 49 years. It is currently a little over 172 times farther from the Sun than we are, call it 26 billion kilometers, and closing on a date, this November 18th, when a message sent from here will need a full 24 hours, a full day, just to reach it. Say something out loud right now. By the time that sound could arrive at Voyager 1, you will have fallen asleep, woken, and fallen asleep again. Sit with that distance for a moment, because your body has no shelf for it. 26 billion kilometers is not a number you can feel, so shrink it down to something your body already knows. If you could somehow drive there in an ordinary car, at highway speed, never once stopping, never once sleeping, it would take you close to 30,000 years to arrive. Light itself, the fastest thing there is, needs a full day. And this small machine has been crossing all of that emptiness, one quiet second at a time, for 49 years, and it is still going. It is not the distance that should unsettle you. It is not the 38,000 miles an hour it is still traveling. Most people assume a machine this old simply runs down and stops, a dead thing, drifting in the dark. That is not what happens here. Its power is dying, yes, a few watts less every year, one instrument after another going quiet. But the spacecraft itself will not stop, it will drift. Tens of thousands of years from now, it will pass within less than 2 light years of another star, a faint one, in a corner of the sky almost no one has a name for, and somewhere far past even that, so far past it that the number stops meaning anything, it will still be moving on the day our own sun begins to die. That is the strange thing that most people never sit with. We tend to picture Voyager 1 as a thing that will simply end, a battery that fades, a voice that goes silent, and then, in some quiet way, is gone. But going silent is not the same as stopping. When the last word finally comes home, the machine will not slow by a single mile an hour. It will keep falling outward, carrying a small golden record built to survive for 1 billion years, long after the star that launched it has swollen, and burned, and loosened its grip and let it go. So here is what tonight actually is. Not a countdown to a death. Something stranger than that. 4 things are happening to Voyager 1 right now, on 4 completely different clocks, and before this is over, you will understand every one of them. You will understand how it climbed so far out, and how fast it is still going. You will understand exactly how its power is dying, watt by watt, instrument by instrument, and roughly when its voice will finally fall quiet. You will understand where the long drift is carrying it, toward a star that almost no one has ever heard of, and you will come to understand the slowest clock of all, the one that belongs to the sun itself, and where this small silent traveller will be on the day our star begins to end. There is nothing here you need to hold on to. No dates to memorize, no distances to keep. Let the numbers pass through you and fall away behind you. If these slow journeys through the dark are the kind of thing that lets you rest, you can follow gravity of sleep, and there will always be another one waiting for you on another night. But for now, there is only this one. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Let the room go soft and dim around you. Let your breathing find its own slow floor, without you doing anything to help it. There is nothing to do here but listen, and drift, and let the distance carry you. Let's begin. Begin with the machine itself, because everything that comes after tonight grows out of something small. The thing we are following through the dark is not a planet. It is not a star, not a cloud of glowing gas wider than 1,000 suns. It is a made thing. A spacecraft, built of aluminum and copper and wire, roughly the size and the weight of a small car, assembled by human hands in clean white rooms on the coast of Florida. People sanded its edges, people tightened its bolts. Many of those people are old now, and many of them are gone, but once you could have stood beside it. You could have reached out and laid your palm flat against its cold metal frame and felt nothing extraordinary at all. Just a machine. Just something a person could build. Hold that in your mind for a moment. That ordinary weight. That thing you could have touched. Because in a little while we are going to send it somewhere no hand will ever follow. And it will help you later to remember that it started here. Small. Within reach. Resting quietly in a room a person could walk across in a few slow steps. On the 5th of September, in the year 1977, at 56 minutes past 12 in the afternoon, Coordinated Universal Time, that machine left the ground. It rose on a long column of fire from a slab of poured concrete at Cape Canaveral, from a place with the plain name Launch Complex 41, and the machine itself was given a plain name too. Voyager 1. Not a name that promises anything, just an old word for a thing that goes, and keeps going. It was not even the first of its kind to leave. That is one of the small, strange truths that tends to get lost. Its identical twin, a spacecraft called Voyager 2, had already risen from the same stretch of coast 16 days earlier, in the 3rd week of that same August, and yet the one that launched second was given the name that means first. It was set on a faster, steeper path, a kind of shortcut through the geometry of the solar system, and that path let it overtake its older sibling, and pull ahead and stay ahead. It has never once slowed down. It has never let its twin catch up. For almost 50 years now, it has been the one out in front. The farthest, the fastest, the loneliest of the two. Bolted to the flank of each of these spacecraft was a strange piece of cargo, and it is worth slowing down over because it will matter enormously by the end of tonight. A phonograph record, a disc 12 inches across, made of copper and plated in real gold, and onto that disc, a small committee of people, led by an astronomer named Carl Sagan, had tried to press the whole of the Earth. Not a summary of it, not a plaque or a paragraph, a recording. 115 photographs turned into sound, spoken greetings in 55 different human languages, some of them very old, roughly 90 minutes of music, gathered from cultures all across the planet, and a stretch of about 12 minutes holding the plain sounds of the world itself. Wind and rain and surf. Birdsong. The beating of a human heart. A mother speaking softly to her child. They did not build this record to survive a decade, or even a century. They plated it in gold and sealed it against the cold for a very specific reason. So that it might still be playable, still hold its faint pressed grooves, 1 billion years from the day it left. 1 billion years. Set that number down gently beside you and leave it there, because we are going to come back to it, and by the time we do, it will mean something almost unbearable. For now, simply notice this one quiet thing. The people who built this small machine were not thinking in the timescale of a mission, or a career, or a single human life. They were already thinking in the timescale of a dying star. But we are getting far ahead of ourselves. None of this asks anything of you. You do not need to hold the date, or the shape of the record, or the name of the man who chaired the committee. Let them settle wherever they land. Let your breathing go on, slow and even, underneath the words. The machine is already off the ground. It is already climbing. There is nothing you need to do to help it on its way. For the first years of its life, this small traveler did the thing it was built to do. It fell outward through the solar system, past the orbits of the great outer planets, and it used their enormous gravity the way a swimmer uses the wall of a pool, kicking off each one, gaining speed, flung faster and farther with every pass. By the time it was finished with the planets, it was moving at a speed that is genuinely difficult to hold in the mind. About 17 kilometers every second, a little more than 10 miles in the time it takes you to draw one slow breath. Fast enough to cross the whole of a continent, coast to coast, in roughly 4 minutes. Fast enough that, if you could somehow run alongside it, an entire city would blur past and be gone before you finished having the thought. And here is the first quiet turn in all of this. That speed, so far past anything a human body could ever feel, that speed that would carry you around the entire Earth in about 20 minutes, is almost nothing out here. It is a crawl. It is barely a drift, because the distances it has to cross are so much larger than the speed is fast. The speed is human, the distance is not. To even talk about where it is, we have to change our ruler entirely. Miles stop being useful out there, the way inches stop being useful for measuring an ocean. So astronomers reach for a bigger unit. They call it the astronomical unit, and it is simply the distance from the Earth to the Sun. About 93 million miles. And one single astronomical unit is already a distance so vast that light itself, the fastest thing that exists, takes a full 8 minutes to cross it. When you feel the warmth of sunlight resting on the back of your hand, you are feeling light that left the sun 8 minutes before it reached you. That is one unit. That is only the first rung of the ladder we are about to climb. So begin to climb it. For years, this small machine kept falling outward. 1 unit, then 10, then dozens. Out past the last of the planets. Out past the place where the sun's light thins to almost nothing. Out into a region so far from home that the sun is no longer a disk you could point to in the sky, but only the brightest of the stars scattered across the black. And then, on the 25th of August, in the year 2012, it crossed a line that nothing built by human hands had ever crossed before. The line was the edge of the sun's own breath. All your life, the sun has been doing more than simply shining. It has been exhaling, blowing out a constant thin wind of charged particles in every direction at once, inflating a great bubble of its own making, a vast and invisible shell with the whole solar system held quietly inside it. Every planet, every ocean, every one of us, all of it, our entire lives, lived within that bubble. And the machine had reached the wall of it. It had reached the place, about 122 astronomical units out, 122 times that 8-minute stretch of sunlight, where the sun's wind finally gives out and the wind between the stars begins to press back. And it did not stop. It passed straight through the wall. On that ordinary August day, this small, cold, made thing became the first object in the entire history of our species to leave the sun's bubble behind it and drift out into the true space between the stars. And if some part of you thinks that is the end of the number, that this must be as far as a story of distance can possibly climb, then you have not yet felt how much farther it has travelled since. Because that August was a long time ago now. The machine has not stopped. It will not stop. And the distance it is reading tonight, in the dark, is far stranger and far lonelier than the one it read on the day it first crossed the line. So let the number keep moving, the way it has never once stopped moving. When the heliopause fell behind it, on that August day, the little machine was about 122 astronomical units from the sun. That was already a distance no mind can truly stand inside. But that was the reading of a much younger craft. Follow the thread forward, slowly. By the late summer of 2024, when the engineers at NASA sat down and wrote out exactly where their spacecraft was, the answer had grown to almost 165 astronomical units, some 15 billion miles, and it was still moving away from you at that same patient, unfeeling speed, roughly 38,000 miles in every single hour, more than 10 miles in the length of one slow breath. Rest on that for a moment, not the total, the rate, in the time it takes you to breathe in, gently, and let it out again. This thing has laid down another 20 miles of empty space between itself and everything that ever made it. It does that while you sleep. It did it while you were being born. It has done it, without pause, without rest, without a single instant of hesitation, for longer than many of the people listening tonight have been alive. There is no engine straining to keep it going. It simply coasts. It was given its speed once, long ago, by the swing of the giant planets, and it has been keeping every mile an hour of it ever since, out where there is nothing left to slow it down. And the number kept climbing after that. It does not wait for us to finish being amazed by it. By the early spring of 2026, by this very year, the craft had drifted out to something near 172 astronomical units, gaining about 3.5 of those enormous units every year. Which is to say that it swallows, annually, a stretch of space several times wider than the whole family of planets we usually picture when we picture the solar system. There is nothing else out there. Nothing else we have ever built has gone half so far. This one small object, colder now than the coldest night you have ever stood in, is simply and completely the most distant thing human hands have ever touched into being. Everything else we have made is behind it. All of it. Every city, every ship, every other machine. All of it is at its back. And here is the next step on the ladder, and it is a strange and quiet one, because it is not made of miles at all. It is made of time. On the 18th of November, in the year 2026, the craft was expected to cross a line drawn not in space, but in patience. Think of the message it still whispers home. That faint radio voice crawling back across the dark toward the great dish antennas that listen for it. The ones the Deep Space Network keeps pointed out into the black. That voice travels at the speed of light, the fastest thing there is, the speed nothing in the universe is permitted to beat. When Voyager launched, that voice took only a handful of hours to reach it, but by this coming November, the gap has opened so wide that the signal, moving at light's own full and absolute speed, needs a whole day to cross it. One complete turning of the Earth. If you sent a single word out to it as you are falling asleep tonight, that word, travelling as fast as anything is ever allowed to travel, would still be out there crossing the emptiness when you woke. It would still be crossing it through your whole next morning. It would only arrive as the following night came down. A full day of light, laid end to end, just to carry one thing to it. That is not a distance you can drive. That is not a distance you can even quite picture. It is a distance you can only measure in waiting. And you do not need to hold any of these figures. Let them be large, and let them pass through you. None of this asks anything of you except that you lie still, and let it be true somewhere in the background, the way the ocean stays true whether or not you are counting its waves. Let your shoulders come down from wherever the day left them. Let the jaw soften. The number will keep climbing whether you follow it or not, and there is a strange comfort in that, in a thing so steady that your attention makes no difference to it at all. Because now we come to the step that makes every number before it feel small and near and almost cozy, like something from your own back garden. For all of that distance, for all those billions of miles, for all those decades of never once slowing down, the craft has not left the sun. It is still held. The sun's gravity still keeps its faint, invisible hand upon the machine, the same way it holds every comet and every drifting grain of ice out in the great dim shell that surrounds us all. That shell has a name. It is called the Oort cloud, a vast and cold swarm of frozen things wrapped all the way around the solar system, like the skin around a fruit. And Voyager has not reached even the nearest edge of it. By the reckoning of the people who track it, it will take about 300 more years, 3 whole centuries of this same relentless coasting, only to arrive at the inner rim of that shell. 300 years. Everyone alive tonight will be long gone by then, and their grandchildren's grandchildren, and theirs again after that, and the machine will only just be knocking at the first gate of the sun's own outermost country. Say it to yourself, softly, in the dark. 300 years only to reach the beginning of the edge, and to pass all the way through that shell, to come out the far side of it, and finally leave the sun behind for good. To become at last a thing that belongs to no star at all, will take not 3 centuries, but 30,000 years. Let that number rest on you a moment. 30,000 years. That is longer than all of recorded history, folded over on itself many times. 30,000 years ago, the first people were pressing their painted hands against cold cave walls by firelight, leaving the oldest marks we have ever found of anyone wanting to say I was here. Take that same span, all of it, everything that has happened since those hands in the dark, and run it forward instead of back, and that is roughly how long it will take one small machine simply to cross the outer wall of its own solar system for the very first time. So we have followed the number a long way tonight, from a launch pad on a September morning, to the wall where the solar wind gives out, to 15 billion miles, to a message that needs a full day of light just to arrive, to 300 years, to 30,000. Each step has quietly made the one before it look like nothing, like a stroll to the end of the street. And you might think, having climbed all of that, that the machine must be nearly free, nearly gone, nearly out. But here is the truth the whole climbing number has been carrying toward you the entire time, gently, patiently, waiting in the dark for you to be ready to hold it. After the launch, and the crossing, and the billions of miles, and the day-long reach of its fading voice, Voyager tonight has not even finished leaving home. There is something inside it that has been cooling since before you were born, and that is the part of the story that quietly changes everything. It is the part that turns all that drifting into a kind of slow dying, told softly, without any alarm at all. You do not need to brace for it. You can let it arrive the way the cold arrives in a room after the fire has burned low, gradually, at the edges first, so gently that for a long while you hardly notice the warmth is going. Because a machine this far from the sun cannot run on sunlight. Out where Voyager drifts tonight, the sun is no longer a fire in the sky. It is one more star among the others, a single bright point you could cover with the corner of a fingernail held out at arm's length, throwing almost no warmth across all that distance. So the spacecraft was never built to drink the light. It was built to carry its own small fire with it, sealed inside its body, a fire that could be lit exactly once and never fed again. Deep in that body sit 3 generators, and inside them a lump of metal that is warm to the touch for a reason far older than any engine humans have ever made. It is plutonium. Plutonium-238, to be precise. A manufactured metal that does one thing, and only one thing. It falls apart, atom by atom, on its own schedule, answering to nothing. It slowly comes undone, and in coming undone it gives off heat. There is no flame in there. There are no moving parts, nothing burning, nothing spinning. There is only a warm stone of metal patiently disassembling itself in the dark, and wrapped around it a ring of quiet devices that turn that heat into a thin trickle of electricity. And that trickle is the whole life of the spacecraft. Every photograph it ever sent, every measurement of the wind between the stars, every faint syllable of its voice reaching back across the years, all of it has been drawn from the warmth of a metal that is doing nothing but ceasing to be. Let that settle for a moment. The most distant thing our species has ever made stays alive by the heat of its own slow ruin. It has been dying, in the gentlest possible sense, from the very first second it was switched on. At the beginning, on that September morning in 1977, the warm heart of it produced about 470 watts of power. Let me put that in your hands the way I have put the other numbers there. 470 watts is not very much. It is a little more than 5 bright bulbs in a ceiling. The entire machine, every camera and heater and radio and computer, the whole of it, ran on about what you might use to light one small room for reading late at night. That was always all it had. A reading lamp, flung across the solar system, expected to keep a spacecraft awake for decades. And even that reading lamp was never going to hold steady, because the same slow falling apart that makes the heat is the very thing that uses it up. This is the mechanism at the center of everything tonight, and it is a simple one, simple enough to hold as you drift. The plutonium loses roughly half of its output over about 87 years. That is its nature, fixed, unhurried, utterly indifferent to anyone watching. But for the engineers on the ground, the practical truth is even plainer than that. The spacecraft loses about 4 watts of power every single year. Every year, 4 watts quietly gone, partly from the metal decaying, and partly from the little heat-catching devices themselves wearing thin. And there is no way, none at all, not one, to add a single watt back. You cannot refuel it. You cannot reach it. You can only spend more carefully each year what is already there and will never be more. So do the arithmetic with me, slowly, the way you would count something to help yourself fall asleep. Nearly 50 years have passed since that lamp was lit. 4 watts a year, taken away and never returned, adds up to something close to 200 watts already gone. Less than half of the original warmth remains. The reading lamp has dimmed to something more like a candle now, and the people who tend it have spent these last years making an impossible kind of budget, deciding, watt by watt, what the spacecraft is still allowed to be. Because when the power in a body begins to fail, you cannot keep everything running. You have to choose. And so, one at a time over the long years, they have been switching off its senses. The cameras were closed decades ago, their eyes shut not long after the last planet fell behind. Heaters that kept delicate parts from freezing were let go, and instruments that once tasted the space around it were darkened one by one, each shut down, buying a little more time for whatever was left. It is a strange and tender thing to picture, if you let yourself, a machine being kept alive by having its senses taken from it, going quietly blind and numb so that its voice, at least, might last a little longer. And then, not long ago at all, on the 17th of April 2026, they reached for another switch. This one turned off an instrument that had spent nearly half a century counting the charged particles streaming through interstellar space. It was the 8th science instrument to be shut down. The saving was almost nothing, about half a watt, the faintest sip of power, and when it was done, only 2 working sensors remained aboard the entire spacecraft, a detector still listening to the waves in the thin plasma around it, and a magnetometer still feeling for the shape of the magnetic field out there in the dark. 2 senses left, out of everything it once had. The man who manages the mission put it about as plainly and as honestly as it can be put. Turning that instrument off, he said, was not anybody's preference. It was simply the best option available. And there is something in that sentence worth resting on tonight. Something very human, folded into all this cosmic machinery. Not anybody's preference. Nobody wanted to do it. Nobody on the ground, none of the engineers who have given careers to this small vessel, wished to reach across 15 billion miles and take away one more of its senses. They did it because the alternative was worse. They did it because a body with a dimming heart must let go of some things in order to keep hold of the one thing that matters most, which for this machine is the ability to still, faintly, say that it is there. You might notice, lying still in the dark, that this is not really a story about a spacecraft anymore, or rather it is, but it has quietly become a story you already know in your own body, in a language older than any of the numbers. You know what it is to run on a warmth you cannot replace. You know what it is for the day to have only so much light in it, and to spend it carefully, and to let some things go so that other things might last. Every living thing that has ever existed has run on exactly this arrangement. A fire lit once, never refueled, dimming by some small amount every single year, its keepers deciding what to switch off first. The spacecraft is only doing openly, out where we can watch it, the thing that every warm creature does. It is spending a heat it will never get back, and doing it with a dignity that asks nothing of anyone. So there it is tonight, drifting through a darkness so complete that the sun is barely a spark behind it, carrying a warm stone of plutonium that grows a little cooler with every turn of the earth beneath you. Blind now, mostly numb, down to 2 thin senses, and a voice that costs it dearly to use. And still it holds on. Still, across that impossible gulf, the trickle keeps trickling. The 2 remaining instruments keep their quiet watch, and the radio keeps finding the strength to whisper home. It is not raging against anything. There is no struggle in it, no fear, nothing that a half-asleep mind needs to be frightened of. There is only a small manufactured warmth, doing what warmth does, which is to fade, and a machine that keeps being alive for exactly as long as that fading will allow. Let your shoulders drop a little as you hold that. Let the arithmetic of it pass through you without asking you to solve anything. 470 watts becoming 400, becoming 300, becoming less. A candle where a lamp once burned. One sense left, and then another, and then, someday, none. There is no cruelty in it. The plutonium is not being taken from the machine by anyone. It is simply obeying the same rule that everything obeys. The rule that says a warm thing surrounded by cold will, given long enough, come to match the cold around it. That is not a tragedy. It is only the way the universe keeps its books, patiently, in a currency of heat, settling every account it has ever opened, including the small warm one riding inside a spacecraft, older than most of the people now listening to its signal. And the question that has been waiting under all of this, the one the whole slow arithmetic has been carrying you toward, is a simple and unhurried one. If the warmth is fading by 4 watts a year, and only 2 senses remain, and the voice already costs so much to lift, then how much longer, really, can it go on speaking at all? The honest answer is that nobody knows, not to the year, and the people who have given their working lives to this machine are the first ones to admit it. There are estimates. The estimates do not agree with one another, and that quiet disagreement is itself a kind of confession about how near the edge the whole thing now runs. Some of the reporting from this very year speaks of the voice falling silent around the year 2030. Others, closer to the engineers who still listen for it, hold out the gentler possibility that the generators may keep just enough warmth alive to send back the faintest word about the machine's own health until something nearer 2036. 6 years, or 12. A childhood, or the length of time it takes a child to become someone who could build a thing like this in the first place. Nobody is lying. The truth simply has a soft edge, because it depends on things no one can measure from where you are lying now, on exactly how much strength is left in a transmitter no larger than the reach of your 2 hands, and on whether the great dishes back on Earth can still catch a whisper that has crossed more than 160 times the entire distance between here and the sun. That whisper is worth resting on for a moment, so let it come slowly. When the spacecraft speaks now, the words it sends leave its antenna as a thin breath of radio light, and even light is not fast enough to make this trip feel short. It takes the better part of a full day for a single message to cross the gulf between the machine and the ears waiting for it. You could wake and rise and move through an entire day of your ordinary life, eat your meals, speak to the people you love, walk the rooms of your house, lie back down in this same bed, and only then would a word spoken by the spacecraft at dawn finally arrive. By the time anyone on Earth hears how the machine is doing, the moment it was describing has already turned a full day into the past. Every report is a letter from something that has already moved on from the place it wrote you from, and the power that lifts each of those letters is measured now not in the 470 watts it carried at the beginning, but in a dwindling remainder, less every year, 4 watts thinner each time the planet finishes another slow lap around the sun. So the engineers have begun to do the only thing left to do, which is to bargain. They go searching, line by careful line, through a machine designed before most of them were born, hunting for any warmth still being spent on something that no longer needs to be kept warm. They have a name for the boldest of these attempts, a small joking name, the Big Bang, and the idea underneath the joke is almost tender. They send a set of instructions across that day-long gulf, asking the spacecraft to trade some of its old, thirsty systems for leaner ones, to give up a little of what it once was in exchange for a little more time, as what it still is. They tried it first on the father twin, the one that left 16 days earlier and now trails behind, to see whether the gamble would hold. And folded inside that gamble is a small and improbable hope, the hope that one of the senses already switched off might be coaxed back to life, that a machine sliding towards silence might for a while be handed back a fraction of its hearing. There is a particular grace in this that is easy to miss when you are half asleep, so let it arrive at its own pace. These are people who will almost certainly outlive the thing they are tending. They know that. They have known it for years. The engineer who manages the mission, a man named Karim Badaruddin, said of one of these hard shutdowns that it was not anybody's preference, only the best option available. That is the whole feeling of it, held in a single breath. Nobody wants to turn the instruments off. Nobody wants to count out the watts like coins laid one by one onto a table. They do it because the only alternative is to lose the voice sooner, and every extra year of that faint, day-late whisper is treated as something worth fighting for, worth staying late for, worth arguing over in rooms full of people who understand exactly how little of it is left. Feel, for a moment, where all of this leaves the body of the machine, somewhere out beyond every planet, in a cold so complete that the numbers describing it stop meaning anything at all. A small warm object is being asked to spend less and less of itself, to draw inward, to let one faculty after another go quietly dark, so that a single thin thread of communication can stay lit a few more years. It is not so far from something you already know in your own body, from the way a very old and very tired person will let the wide world narrow around them, will stop rising for the things that no longer matter, will keep only the few and the near, a hand to hold, a voice to answer to, and spend what warmth remains on those alone. The spacecraft is doing exactly that. It is keeping the hand and the voice. It is letting everything else go. You do not need to hold any of these numbers. Let the years, the 2030 and the 2036, drift apart and dissolve without your keeping them. Let the 4 watts a year fall through you without catching on anything. The only thing worth carrying out of all this counting is a single soft shape, the shape of a warmth that is being spent down carefully, almost lovingly towards zero, and a small crowd of people who will not let it go quietly, who keep leaning toward a whisper out of the dark and answering it for as long as there is any whisper left to answer. That is the mechanism at the center of all of this, not the plutonium, not the watts, not the half-life ticking its long way down. The mechanism is a fading warmth, and the refusal, on both ends of that day-long silence, to pretend the fading is not happening. And yet, this is the thing that will begin to open beneath you now, so stay soft as it does. The end of the voice is not the end of the traveller. When the last watt is finally too thin to lift a single word, when the great dishes on Earth turn away at last because there is nothing more to catch, something will still be true out there that no shutdown and no shortage can ever touch. The machine will still be moving. It will still be carrying, unread and unheard, everything it was given to carry. The silence, when it finally comes, will fall only over the talking. It will not fall over the going. And what happens to a thing that has stopped speaking but has not stopped travelling? What becomes of it, across the spans of time we have not even begun to reach yet, is where this night is quietly taking you. So let the going be the thing you hold now, not the silence. Picture it the way you might picture your own breath continuing while you sleep, without instruction, without witness. The traveller does not know it has been switched off. That is the first strange kindness of it. There is no moment out there when the machine notices the dishes on Earth have turned away, no small internal grief, no settling of the shoulders the way there might be in you tonight. The heater's coal, the transmitter goes quiet, and the body of the thing, a little more than a ton of aluminum and golden wire, keeps moving at the same speed it was moving the instant before, because nothing in the dark it travels through has any reason to slow it down. Space does not push back. There is almost nothing out there to push with, so the last command it ever receives is not really the last thing that happens to it. It is only the last thing that happens to it that we get to hear. And here is where the scale of it begins to change, so stay soft, because the numbers are about to grow past anything a day or a year can hold. You have been thinking, perhaps, in the small human clock of the mission. 1977, 2012. The instruments going dark one by one across these last few years. Sometime in the next decade, the final word. That whole span, launched to silence, is a human lifetime. It is a person born into it who could live to see the end of it. That clock is the one we can feel, but the traveller runs on a different clock entirely, and once the voice is gone, that different clock is the only one left running. Consider one fact that sounds at first like a contradiction, and then sit with it until it stops sounding like one. Voyager crossed into interstellar space in 2012. It is out beyond the reach of the solar wind, past the bubble the sun blows around its family of planets, in the thin cold medium between the stars. By every reasonable meaning of the word, it has left. And yet it has not left at all. It is still held. The sun's gravity, weak as it is at that enormous remove, still has a grip on it, still curves its path, still counts it as one of its own. The spacecraft is a citizen of the solar system that has walked out the front door and is standing in the yard, and the yard, it turns out, is unimaginably large. Not the neighbourhood you were picturing, not the 8 planets and the ring of rubble past Neptune. Something far wider wraps all of that. A great faint shell of frozen debris that the sun has quietly owned this whole time, without any of us being able to see it. That shell is called the Oort cloud, and it is where the traveller is going, though going is a generous word for a journey this slow. From where Voyager is now, at the speed it is holding, it will take about 300 years just to reach the inner edge of that cloud. Let that settle. 300 years. Think of how far back 300 years reaches into the human story behind you. No one alive now will be alive then. The language you are being spoken to in tonight will have drifted and softened into something a listener 3 centuries from now might struggle to follow. Whole nations will have risen and ended in that time. And across all of it, every year of it, the traveller will still only be arriving at the near edge of a region it has not even begun to cross. It has not reached the cloud yet. It is still, by the standards of that outer country, in the doorway, and the cloud itself. To pass all the way through it, from that inner edge to the far side, where the sun's ownership finally thins out to nothing, and true departure begins, will take roughly 30,000 years more. Not 300. 30,000. Set the 2 numbers beside each other, and feel the gap open. The 300 years to reach the edge, the span you just stretched your imagination across, the span longer than any empire, is not even 1/100th of the time it takes simply to get through what comes after. If the reaching were a single day, the crossing would be most of a year. 30,000 years ago on this planet, there were people much like you, sheltering from the cold of an ice age, painting animals on the walls of caves by firelight, leaving handprints on stone that we can still find. That is how far back you would have to go to match the time still ahead of the traveller before it clears the last of the sun's frozen belongings. Everything human, all of recorded history and all the unrecorded history before it, fits comfortably inside that one crossing. You do not need to hold these numbers. Let me say that plainly, so your body can hear it. You are not being asked to remember 300 or 30,000, or to do anything with them at all. Let them pass through you the way the traveller passes through that cloud, without effort, without gripping. The point is not the figures, the point is the feeling underneath them, which is that the machine's journey has already, quietly outgrown us. By the time it merely finishes leaving, everything that built it will be so far in its past that the building of it will be older to that moment than the Ice Age is to this one, and it will still be moving. There is a word people reach for when they try to name a thing like this, and the word is derelict. A ship abandoned by its crew, still afloat, still carried by the current, no hand on the wheel. That is close, but it is not quite right, and the way it is not right is worth holding gently. A derelict on the ocean is at the mercy of wind and wave. It is battered, it fills with water, it goes down eventually, taken apart by the very medium that carries it. But the medium the traveller moves through is not the sea. It is very nearly nothing. There is no wind out there to batter it, no water to seep in, almost no dust to wear it away. A thing set moving in that emptiness is not slowly destroyed by its journey. It is preserved by it. The cold that killed the mission is the same cold that will keep the body of the spacecraft intact, more or less as it is now, for a span of time that makes the mission itself look like a single blink at the very beginning of a very long night. So it is not a wreck, it is not sinking, it is not being ground down. It is a ghost ship in only one sense, that its crew was never aboard, that it was always empty, that the hands that made it were 4 billion miles behind it before it was even a day old. It carries no one. It has never carried anyone, and yet it carries everything, because bolted to its side is the message we will come to in a little while, the record built to say who we were to whatever might one day find it. For now, hold only this: the going does not stop when the talking stops. It does not even slow. The machine keeps its speed and keeps its heading and keeps its cargo, across 300 years, across 30,000, indifferent to all of it, awake in the only way a made thing can be, which is to say not awake at all, simply continuing. And even that, even the crossing of the whole Oort cloud, even the final true departure from everything the sun can call its own, is not the largest clock at work here. There is one more, and it is the one that will matter most before this night is done. So let me set it turning softly in the background of everything that follows. The traveller is leaving the sun. But the sun is not standing still. The sun itself is falling, endlessly, around something far larger, sweeping in a vast slow circle around the dense bright centre of the whole galaxy, dragging its planets and its frozen outer shell, and now this one small departing machine along the edge of that circle with it. One full turn around that centre takes about 230 million years. Not 30,000, 230 million. A number so much larger than the last one that the last one, the great crossing you just strained to picture, becomes a rounding error, a footnote, a thing too small to see. The sun has made that journey around the galaxy perhaps 20 times since it first ignited. It has made only a fraction of one turn since the first creatures crawled out of Earth's oceans, and the traveller, once it is finally free of the sun's grip, does not escape that turning. It joins it. It settles into its own long orbit around the same distant centre, one more small body sweeping through the dark on a circuit measured not in years or centuries, but in hundreds of millions of years. A passenger now, not of a mission, not even of a solar system, but of a galaxy. The voice will have been gone for an unthinkable stretch by then. The people who gave it that voice will be long past remembering. But the going will still be going. The circle will still be turning, and the question this night keeps folding you toward, quietly, patiently, is not whether the traveller stops, because it does not, but what happens behind it while it drifts. What becomes of the small warm star it is leaving, the star that made it, across clocks even longer than the one the galaxy itself keeps. But before any of that, long before the galaxy has carried it even the first small arc of that enormous circuit, there is a nearer date. It is a strange thing, to place a date on something drifting so far past every human hand, and yet the arithmetic is patient, and the arithmetic is willing. Take the speed it holds now. Take the direction it is falling. Follow those two simple facts forward the way you would follow a stone, rolling down a long, gentle slope, and a moment arrives, far off but real, and you can even name the year. Somewhere around the year 40,272, give or take the wide margin any such number must carry across that much time, the traveller will pass close to a star, not close in any way your body would understand as close. It will come within roughly 1 3/4 of a light year of a small dim star that sits, today, about 17.5 light years from the room you are lying in. The star has a plain catalogue name, a little string of letters and numbers, and a second name, Gliese 445, and almost no one alive has ever heard of it, or ever will. It has done nothing to earn our attention. It is not bright, it is not special. It has only this single accident to its name, that it happens to be standing, more or less, along the path that a spacecraft is quietly falling down. The traveller is aimed, loosely, toward the constellation Ophiuchus, tilted about 35 degrees up out of the flat plane the planets keep, moving in nearly the same direction the Sun itself drifts among its neighbours. And nothing about that aim was chosen for this star. No one targeted it. There was no rendezvous arranged, no meeting planned, no signal set to fire when it arrives. It is simply the direction the falling goes, and the star simply happens to lie in the long, slow way of it. So there will be no encounter. There will only be a passing. If there were anyone out there, if there were some world circling that faint star, and eyes upon it, and a mind behind the eyes turned up to the dark on the very night the traveller slid by, they would need instruments far finer than ours even to notice it. A cold fleck of metal crossing a gap so wide that light itself would take most of 2 years to cross it. And there is almost certainly no one. Only two objects, a made thing and a burning thing, sliding past each other in a silence that has by then already lasted tens of thousands of years. Neither one aware of the other, neither one slowing, neither one turning to look. Let that pass through you softly. You do not need to hold the year, or the star, or the distance. Let your shoulders ease down into the dark, and let the number go. Because here is the layer beneath that layer, the thing the night has been carrying you slowly toward. Riding on the side of that drifting metal, bolted to the body of the traveller where no wind will ever touch it, is a disc. A record, in the old sense of the word, a thing made to be played. It is not large. It would rest across your two open hands. It is copper, plated in gold, and it was made, deliberately, patiently, with a strange and quiet ambition, to last. Not to last a decade, not to last as long as the mission that sent it, or the memory of that mission, or the names of the people who built it, or the country whose emblem it carries. It was engineered to stay playable for something close to 1 billion years, its thin skin of gold shielding the grooves against the slow, grain-by-grain sanding of interstellar dust, across spans of time that make the passing of that nameless star feel like a single quiet afternoon. 1 billion years. Let that one settle where you are. You do not have to do anything with it. You do not have to picture it, or measure it, or keep it. Just let it rest in the room for a breath. 1 billion years is longer than there have been complex animals crawling across the surface of the earth. It is longer than the continents have held their present shapes, longer than these particular oceans have had these particular shores. It is a stretch of time so far past the length of a single human life, past the length of every human life laid end to end, that the mind simply loosens its grip and lets it drift away. And that loosening is not a failure. That loosening is exactly right. Let it drift. Let your breathing slow to match the slowness of the thing. The people who built that disc understood precisely what they were doing when they chose to make it last that long. They were not making it to be found next year, or next century, or by anyone they would ever know. They were making it to outlast the very world that recorded it. And the man who led the small committee that chose what would be pressed into its grooves, what sounds, what pictures, what greetings, understood the full weight of that decision better than most. He set it down in plain words. Billions of years from now, he wrote, the sun, swollen by then into a distended red giant, will have reduced the earth to a charred cinder. He did not write it as a warning, or a horror, or a plea. He wrote it the way you might note the lateness of the hour, as a simple fact of the machinery of things. The record was built with that ending already folded into it, built to still be turning, in a manner of speaking, still holding its faint cargo of a vanished morning, long after the morning itself, and the planet that woke to it, are gone. And so if you follow the two clocks side by side, the way this night keeps asking you to, something quietly enormous comes into view. There is the clock of the traveller, ticking down its watts, drifting toward a stranger's star, circling a galaxy across hundreds of millions of years at a time. And there is the clock of the little disk it carries, wound to run for 1,000 million years. indifferent to all of it. On that second clock, the flyby of the dim star is nothing. The escape from the sun's grip is nothing. Even the traveller's own long death, its final cold silence out in the dark, is barely a first tick. The record was made to still be legible ages after the spacecraft carrying it has become just another silent fragment of iron and gold, one more small body falling forever through the black, which leaves only the last and largest clock of the three. Not the metal, not the disk. The star, the small, warm, ordinary star at the center of everything you have ever known. The one that is, at this very moment, pouring its light down onto the roof above you, while you lie here in the dark. That star has its own countdown running, slow and certain, and it is that countdown, longer than the drift, longer than the flyby, nearly as long as the record's own impossible life, that the whole of this night has been bending toward. Not where the traveller will be, not what it will be carrying past, but what will have become, across all that time, of the star that made it. And so, at last, we come to it. The star, not a symbol of it, not a distant idea, but the actual body of it, the enormous ball of hot, bright gas that has hung over every single day you have ever lived. The one whose light is settling onto the roof of the room you are lying in right now, this very second, in the dark. The one that will still be there tomorrow when you wake, looking exactly as it has always looked, patient and ordinary and warm. That star is dying. It has been dying since long before there was anyone here to notice, dying so gently that across every human life that has ever begun and ended, it has not appeared to change at all, and the shape of its death is almost nothing like the shape you are probably carrying in your mind. Because here is the thing that nearly everyone gets wrong about the end of the sun. When you imagine it, if you have ever let yourself imagine it at all, you most likely picture an explosion. A sudden violence, a flash across the whole sky, a burst, a star tearing itself apart in one terrible instant, the way it is drawn in films, the way the word ending seems to promise. That picture is the one most of us are quietly handed at some point, and it is simply not true. The sun will not explode. It cannot explode. It is not heavy enough. The great detonations, the ones that briefly outshine entire galaxies, the ones we call supernovae, are reserved for stars far larger than ours, giants carrying 8 or 10 times the sun's material, so massive they finally collapse under their own crushing weight. Our star is a small, modest thing beside them. It will never have that kind of ending. Not the blast, not the flash, not the sudden tearing apart. Something far quieter, and in its own strange way far more patient, is waiting for it instead. The sun will not die by shattering. It will die by swelling. That is the real shape of it. Not a sudden loss, but a slow, monstrous growth. To understand why, you only have to understand what the star is doing at this very moment, tonight, while you rest. Deep in its core, under pressure and heat you cannot really hold in your head, the sun is fusing hydrogen into helium. That is all a star is, at heart. A furnace slowly turning one kind of atom into another, and pouring out the leftover energy as light and warmth, some tiny fraction of which is falling on you right now. It has been doing this for about 4.5 billion years already, steady and reliable, and it has enough hydrogen left in its core to keep doing it for billions more. But not forever. Nothing burns forever. And when the core finally runs low on the hydrogen it feeds on, the star will not simply flicker out like a lamp. It will do something much larger. The best estimates put that turning point somewhere between 5 and 7 billion years from now. Let that number rest in the room with you for a moment, because it is almost impossible to feel honestly. 5 billion years. The sun and the earth together are only about 4.5 billion years old, so this is more time still ahead of the star than all the time it has already lived. It is longer than there have been oceans on this planet. Longer than there has been anything you would recognize as life. If you took the whole span of recorded human history, every empire, every language, every name ever written down, and laid it end to end, you would need to repeat it hundreds of thousands of times over, just to reach the far edge of that number. It is a length of time the mind cannot hold, and you do not need to hold it. Let it be as vast and as soft as it wants to be. Let it pass through you. There is nothing in it you are being asked to carry. When that moment comes, the core, choked with the helium ash of its own long burning, will begin to contract and grow hotter, and the outer layers of the star will respond by billowing outward. The sun will begin to bloat. Over a stretch of time still measured in the hundreds of millions of years, it will swell into what astronomers call a red giant, a bloated, cooler, redder version of itself, swollen to many times its present size, so large that from the surface of a surviving inner world, it would no longer be a small bright disk you must not look at, but a vast, dull, red wall of fire filling a great part of the sky. That is the death that is truly waiting for our star. Not a bang, a swelling, not a sudden dark, but a terrible slow brightening and reddening and growing that will reshape everything near it. But here is where the comfort of that enormous number quietly falls apart, and this is the part I want you to hold gently, because it is the real turn of this whole night. You might think, hearing 5 or 7 billion years, that the Earth has all of that time in hand, that whatever becomes of the world, it becomes of it only at the very end, when the star finally dies. That is the second thing almost everyone gets wrong. The sun does not need to reach its own death to end the world it warms. It does not need to swell into a red giant to make this planet unlivable. It will have done that long, long before. Because the sun is not only dying, it is brightening. Slowly, steadily, over its whole life, as its core converts hydrogen into denser helium, the star grows very gradually more luminous. It is a change so slow that no one has ever felt it, and no one ever will. But it does not stop, and the honest calculations say that in only about 1 billion years from now, not 5, not 7, but roughly 1, the sun will have grown bright enough that the gentle band of warmth around it, the narrow zone where liquid water can exist, will have crept outward past where the Earth is orbiting. The planet will be left behind on the hot side of that line. The temperatures will climb. The oceans, every ocean, the water in every sea and every lake and every drop of rain that has ever fallen, will begin to warm and rise into the air and boil away into space. Not in the far death of the star, in roughly 1 billion years, while the sun from the outside still looks like an ordinary yellow star, unremarkable, patient, exactly the one you know. So sit with that for a breath, softly, the way you would sit with any large and quiet fact in the dark. The end of the world and the end of the sun are not the same event, and they are not even close together. Not the same moment, not the same clock. The star that made the oceans will boil them away while it is still, by any outside measure, perfectly healthy, still burning, still with billions of good years left in it. The Earth's habitable life is far shorter than the sun's. The world runs out of time long before its star does. And that gap, that strange, enormous gap between when this planet dies and when the sun finally dies, is going to matter more than almost anything else once we come back around to the small silent traveller still drifting out there in the cold, carrying its record. Because remember what that record was built to do. Remember the impossible clock we set beside the metal and the disc. That gold-plated, grooved thing engineered to stay playable for something close to 1 billion years in the vacuum. Its soft gold surface holding off the slow erosion of cosmic dust. 1 billion years. It is the same shape of number, almost exactly, as the time the Earth has left with liquid water on its face. And it was Carl Sagan himself, the man who chaired the committee that chose what would go onto that disc, who saw the two clocks lined up side by side and wrote it down plainly. Billions of years from now, he said, our sun, by then a distended red giant star, will have reduced the Earth to a charred cinder. He knew, when he helped fill that record with the sound of a human heartbeat and a mother's greeting and music from across the whole warm world, that he was pressing all of it into a form built to outlast the very planet it came from. The record was never really made to survive us. It was made to survive the Earth. It was made to still be legible when the world that made it is gone. And so the shape of tonight begins, quietly to invert. All this while we have been following the traveller outward, watching its power fade, watching it go silent, watching it drift toward a stranger's star tens of thousands of years from now. And it has been easy to think of the spacecraft as the fragile thing, the small mortal thing, and the sun and the earth as the solid ground it left behind. But that is the last and largest thing to get wrong. It is not the traveller that is fragile against the star. It is the world. The Earth has perhaps 1 billion years of living warmth left in it. The record on that spacecraft has perhaps 1 billion years of playable life. And the sun, the source of all of it, has billions upon billions more, and a death still waiting at the end of those that will not be a quiet fading, but a slow and total transformation of everything it touches. So before we can say where the little machine will be when its star finally dies, we have to follow the star itself, all the way down into that death, and see, one stage at a time, exactly what becomes of it, and of the small crowded planet third out from its light. Here is the thing most people get wrong about the death of a star like ours, and it is worth setting down slowly, because it quietly changes the shape of everything that comes after. When you picture the sun dying, you probably picture an explosion, a flash, a sudden violence that ends the world in an instant, the way a candle is pinched between two fingers, or a fuse burns down to nothing. That is the image we carry, and it is simply wrong. The sun is not heavy enough to explode. It will never go supernova. It will never tear itself apart in a single blinding moment. Its death is not an event at all. It is a process, and the process is so slow that no living creature could ever stand and watch it happen. Not a bang, but a swelling. Not a moment, but an age. Not a fire that arrives, but a warmth that simply will not stop growing. And the strangest part, the part that unsettles most gently, is that the sun does not have to die for the earth to end. The two are not the same ending. They are separated by billions of years. Long before the sun swells into anything monstrous, long before it reaches out to take a single planet, it will only grow a little brighter. Stars like ours brighten slowly across the whole of their long lives, and ours is doing it now, this very night, so gradually that no one alive will ever feel the difference. But it gathers, it accumulates, and in roughly 1 billion years from now, that patient brightening will have crossed a line that has nothing to do with explosions at all. The sun will pour down just a little more warmth than the earth can bear, and the narrow band where liquid water can exist, the thin ring we happen to sit inside, will drift outward, past the earth, and leave us behind on the wrong side of it. Picture what that means, softly, from right where you are lying. Not the ground on fire, not the sky cracking open, only the seas beginning to lift. The oceans, all of them, the ones you have swum in and the ones you have only ever seen from ashore, warming degree by patient degree, until they climb into the air as vapor and do not fall back down. The rivers thin to threads, the rain forgets how to come, the blue drains out of the planet from the top, and what is left behind is a dry, bright, silent stone, still turning, still circling a sun that has not even truly begun to die. That is 1 billion years away. It is a span so vast that it stops behaving like a number, so do not try to hold it. Let it be nothing more than this, a very long time, longer than anything you have a shape for. You do not need to carry it. You do not need to remember any of this in the morning. Let your shoulders come down. Let the number drift on past you the way the little machine drifts on past its own dead future, out there indifferent, unbothered by any of it. And here is where that small machine sailing out toward Ophiuchus quietly walks back into the story, because the gold-plated disc bolted to its flank was built to stay playable for about 1 billion years. Sit with the strange rhyme of that for a moment, not as arithmetic to solve, but as a coincidence too neat to be a coincidence. The record was engineered to last roughly as long as the Earth has left to hold an ocean. When the last sea on this planet finally boils away into a hot white sky, the grooves cut into that disk. Out in the cold and the dark and the perfect stillness between the stars will still be sharp enough to trace with a needle. The man who chose what to place upon it understood this exactly. He wrote that billions of years from now, the Sun, by then a distended red giant star, will have reduced the Earth to a charred cinder. He built the record already knowing it would outlive the world that made it. He built a letter designed to survive the person who sent it. So the record outlasts the ocean. But the ocean is only the first thing to go, and the Sun's real transformation, the part that finally earns the word death, is still waiting far beyond it. The brightening that boils the seas is not the end of the Sun. It is barely the opening of the end. The Sun will keep burning the hydrogen in its core for billions of years yet, calm and yellow and apparently unchanged, until somewhere between 5 and 7 billion years from now, that core at last runs empty. And when a star that has lived its whole life on hydrogen reaches the bottom of the tank, it does not quietly switch off. It does the opposite. It comes apart slowly, from the inside out, and it begins to grow. That growing is the red giant. The death we have been circling this entire time. The thing we keep almost naming and setting back down. The Sun will swell outward, larger and redder and cooler at its surface, even as its heart burns hotter than it ever has, until it is no longer the small, tidy disk you have known your whole life, but a bloated, dim, enormous thing that fills a frightening share of the sky. It will breathe away close to half of its own mass into space as it goes, shedding its outer layers like a slow exhale, and it will reach out, and one at a time, it will take the inner planets. There is little doubt about the first two. It will swallow Mercury. It will swallow Venus. Whether it reaches as far as the Earth is a question the people who study this still argue over carefully, in the guarded language of those who know they will never live to see the answer. One of them has said it plainly, that he is confident the Sun will swallow Mercury and Venus and spare Mars, and that the Earth's fate sits in the uncertain middle, less clear than either. And that shrug, that honest uncertainty stretched across billions of years, is the exact place where the little machine and the dying star finally belong to the same breath. Because whatever happens to the Earth, whether it is swallowed whole or only scorched down to a bare and airless cinder and left circling a monster, the spacecraft will not be here to be counted among the lost. It left. It is leaving still, right now, tonight, a little farther with every slow word of this. The fragile thing was never the traveller. It was always the crowded blue world it carried a single picture of. So let us follow the star the rest of the way down now, past the swelling and into whatever waits on the far side of the swelling, and see what is left of the Sun when even the red giant has finished, and where, in all that vast and quiet ruin, the small machine will by then have drifted. Follow it down then, and the first thing to know, before the ember, before the long cold, is that the swelling does not last. That is a strange small mercy folded into all of this, and it is worth resting on for a moment, because everything about a red giant sounds as though it ought to be permanent, and it is not. The Sun will spend almost the whole of its enormous life the way it spends tonight, a steady yellow star burning quietly for thousands of millions of years, warming a small blue world it does not know is there. And then it will spend only a little while, only a few 100 million years, as the monster. A few 100 million years is a length of time you cannot really feel. It is longer than there have been flowers on the Earth, and yet, measured against the whole life of the star, it is a single held breath, taken right at the very end. The giant flares. It reaches out past the orbits of the inner worlds. It does whatever it is finally going to do to the Earth, swallow it or scorch it, the thing no one can quite promise you. And then, Almost as soon as it began by the slow clock of the cosmos, it begins to come apart. Not with a bang. This is the piece almost everyone gets wrong when they try to picture the death of a star like ours. They imagine an explosion. They imagine the sky torn open, a flash that outshines a galaxy, the violent ends they have seen in photographs. But our sun is not heavy enough to die that way. It will not detonate. It will not collapse into anything dense and terrible and fast. Its ending is quieter than that, and somehow lonelier for being so quiet. What the sun will do, in the end, is simply let go. The outer layers, the vast bloated shell of the red giant, are only loosely held by then. The star's grip on its own outermost gas has grown weak, and so, gently, over tens of thousands of years, it breathes those layers off into the dark. Not thrown, not blasted, released, the way you might exhale slowly in a still room. Shell after shell of glowing gas drifts outward, wider and thinner and cooler, until the sun has shed something close to half of everything it ever was. Half of the mass that has held this whole family of planets in place since before there was a planet to stand on. Gone, spread out into a great soft cloud of shining vapor that astronomers, for reasons of old and imperfect naming, call a planetary nebula, though there are no planets in it, and it was never anything but a star letting go of its own body. And you should know that this cloud, this last exhalation, is beautiful. If anyone were near, if any eye at all were left in the solar system to see it, it would be one of the loveliest things in the sky. A glowing ring or a pair of glowing wings, lit from within by what remains. But by then there is no one to see it. That is part of the weight of this. The most beautiful thing the sun will ever do, it will do to an empty room. And when the last of those layers has drifted away, when the great cloud has thinned out and cooled and dispersed into the general darkness between the stars, something is left behind at the center. The core, the old dense heart of the sun, where all that fusion once roared, now laid bare with its outer robes stripped off. It is small. That is the thing you must hold on to, because it is so hard to believe. The sun, which right now could hold more than 1 million Earths inside it, will leave behind a core no larger than the Earth itself. A ball of packed carbon and oxygen, the ash of the fires that once kept you warm, squeezed into a sphere you could, in principle, lay across the face of the world you were born on. This is a white dwarf. And it is not burning. Whatever this thing is, it is not a furnace anymore. Nothing is fusing in there. Nothing is being made. It is only hot, ferociously hot, the leftover heat of a life that is ended, with no way left to make any more. And so it does the only thing an ember can do, when the fire that lit it will never come again. It coals. Rest here for a moment. Let your shoulders drop. There is nothing in any of this that you need to hold or carry. Let the numbers move through you and out the other side. Because the cooling of a white dwarf is where the ordinary sense of time you carry in your body finally breaks down completely, and it is gentler to meet it slowly. A campfire ember dims in an hour. A poker pulled from a forge loses its glow in minutes. But this is an Earth-sized coal made of the crushed ash of a star, and it holds its heat with an almost unbearable patience. It does not cool in an hour, or a year, or 1,000 years. It cools over thousands of millions of years, and then over thousands of millions more, and it is still not done. To go from a white-hot dwarf to a truly cold and dark and dead thing, an ember with no glow left at all, the kind of object astronomers can only describe in theory because the universe is not yet old enough to contain a single one, takes a length of time so long that we do not measure it in billions of years. We measure it in trillions, in millions of millions. The universe as it stands tonight, everything that has happened since the very beginning, all of it, is not even a fifth of the way through the first stretch of that cooling. The sun's corpse will still be quietly giving off the last of its warmth, long, long after the universe has run out of the kind of history that has anything to do with us. And here is the mathematics that your everyday life is built to hide from you, because you could not function if you felt it all the time. The step from a human life to the age of a star is already almost too large to think. Fewer than 100 years for you, against thousands of millions for the sun. But the step from the age of a star to the cooling of its corpse is larger again, another whole leap of the same terrible size, stacked on top of the first. Not one impossible number, but impossible numbers standing on each other's shoulders, reaching up into a darkness that has no floor. And the little machine we have been following all this while, the one drifting away from all of it right now, tonight, is going to be present, in its silent metal way, through every single layer of that. Now think about what the letting go does to the planets that are left, because the sun's grip on its family was never anything but its mass, its weight, the sheer heaviness that bends space around it and holds each world in its long, slow curve. And the sun, dying, throws away half of that weight. So the leash loosens. Every planet still circling the white dwarf feels the pull that holds it suddenly cut nearly in half, and each of them drifts outward, settling into a wider and lazier orbit around the shrunken ember at the center. Neptune, which tonight circles at roughly 30 times, the distance from the sun to the Earth, out there in the deep cold where the light is already almost nothing, will drift outward until it circles at something closer to 60 times that distance. Twice as far, the whole outer solar system swelling loose and slack, the surviving worlds falling gently away from the corpse of the star that made them, like children stepping back from a fire that has finally gone out. And notice what has happened, without a single instrument to record it, without a single voice to name it. The system that this whole story began inside, the tidy diagram you learnt as a child, the sun in the middle and the planets in their rings, is gone. Not rearranged. Gone. There is no sun in the sense you mean the word. There is a cinder. There are a few scorched and scattered survivors drifting on loosened orbits through a dark that used to be lit. The inner worlds are ash or memory, the comfortable warmth that every living thing that ever existed took entirely for granted has simply stopped, and will not start again, not in 1 trillion years, not ever. And through all of it, past the swelling and the shedding and the great slow cooling of the ember, the little spacecraft is not here. That is the point I keep returning you to, softly, because it is the strange still center of the whole thing. Long before any of this begins, before the first flicker of the red giant, before the sun has even finished the quiet middle of its life, the machine will already be gone. It will have left the neighborhood entirely, drifted out past the last cold edge of everything the sun ever held, and kept going, indifferent, unhurried, carrying its one gold record and its single fading picture of a crowded blue world out into a night that does not end. It did not die with the star that built it. It was never going to. It was already too far away, already too long gone, already somewhere else in the dark, when the light behind it finally went out for good. And here is where the numbers begin to come apart softly in your hands, the way a familiar word repeated too many times stops sounding like a word at all. You are built for time you can hold. A single night, like this one. A year, turning once around the sun. The length of a life, which if you are fortunate runs to something like 80 of those years. 80 winters, 80 slow circuits of one ordinary star. That is the widest span your body was ever shaped to feel. Everything past it is a kind of guessing, a reaching toward a shelf your arms were never long enough to touch. And I only want to walk you up onto that shelf gently, one step at a time, because each step is larger than the one before, and there is no hurry in any of them. You do not have to keep the numbers. You only have to let them pass through you, the way the dark passes over a house at night. Start close, 300 years from now, to reach only the near inner edge of the great shell of frozen debris that still loosely belongs to the sun. 300 years is longer than most of the countries you could name have existed in their present shape. It is a dozen generations, grandparents you have no photograph of, whose names have already softened into nothing, and that only brings the little machine to the doorstep. To cross the whole width of that frozen shell and finally truly leave, to be past everything the sun has ever held even faintly in its grip, takes something closer to 30,000 years. 30,000. Reach back that far and there are no cities, no writing, no wheel, only small bands of people in skins, watching the same stars you are lying beneath now, from the mouths of caves. The entire recorded story of your species, every war and harvest and love letter and lullaby, fits comfortably inside that single crossing, with room to spare on both ends. And still, the spacecraft is not out. It is only just leaving. Climb one rung higher. In something like 38,000 years, drifting the whole time, it will pass its nearest star, a dim and nameless thing called Gliese 445, and it will come no closer than a little under 2 light years, which sounds like an arrival until you remember what a light year is. That is not a near miss. That is passing another ship in a fog so vast that neither one ever sees the other. 2 specks crossing an ocean with hundreds of years of empty water between them at the closest, and calling it, for lack of any better word, an encounter. That star sits about 17.5 light years from your window tonight, and the machine will spend the better part of 40,000 years simply drifting toward the general place where it will someday be. Nothing aimed it there, no one steered. It is only falling, the way everything in the sky is always falling, in the long, unhurried arithmetic that your fast, warm, short life keeps carefully hidden from you. And now the step that has no handrail. Every star you have ever seen, the sun included, and the little spacecraft along with it, all of them are wheeling together around the center of the galaxy, one enormous slow turn, and that turn takes about 230 million years. Let that settle. Not 230 years. 230 million. The last time the sun sat where it sits now on that great wheel, there were no birds, no flowers, nothing you would recognize as a face anywhere on the Earth. To finish even one lap, one single circle of the galaxy, the machine would have to keep drifting through the dark for longer than the dinosaurs existed from first to last. And it will make that lap, and another after that, silent, tumbling, indifferent, riding the same current every star rides, for as long as there is a galaxy to ride it in. This is the mathematics that ordinary daylight keeps from you, and it keeps it from you kindly, because you could not carry a heavy day if you truly felt the weight of all that time behind it. So the mind builds a small warm room out of the hours it can hold, and lives in there and calls it the world. But the machine lives outside that room. It always did. And when you set the little numbers of a life against the long ones it moves through, the little ones do not shrink. They vanish. 80 years against 30,000 is a single breath against a whole night's sleep. 30,000 against 230 million is that same breath again, against a life. And the far end of the star's own story, the cold ember it becomes, will go on cooling not for millions of years but for trillions, dimming so slowly that a trillion years is only the beginning of its long fade toward nothing. Stack them, one atop the other, and the tower does not reach the sky. The sky was never that high. The tower keeps climbing past where sky has any meaning, and nowhere in all of that height is there a witness. This is the part I will say plainly, because you can hold it if I say it softly. It will not be a person who is there to see the machine pass its stranger star. Not a person, and not a nation, because nations are things of a few hundred years, and the machine will outlast every one of them the way an ocean outlasts a wave. And not a language, because no word you speak tonight will survive even the 300 years to the doorstep, let alone the 30,000 to the door. And not a memory, and not a mourner, and not a single set of eyes anywhere in the dark turned toward it in wonder or in grief. It will do the largest thing anything your kind ever built has done, and it will do it entirely alone, with no one left who knows its name, or the name of the world that made it, or that the world was ever there at all. There is a strange mercy folded inside that, and I want to hand it to you before we go higher still, because it is the sort of thing that is easier to receive when you are already loosening towards sleep. The machine does not know it is alone. It cannot be lonely. It feels no cold in the 230 million years, no ache in the long crossing, no fear at the nameless star. It only goes. The dread is entirely ours, sitting here in our warm small room, feeling the floor of time drop away beneath the number. And you are allowed to set that dread down now if you like, to let your shoulders drop with it, to let the enormous figures wash past you the way deep water washes past a stone on the bed of a river, moving, always moving, and the stone simply resting, untroubled, held, because the truth underneath the mathematics is quieter than the mathematics, and it is this: the machine will be old past all our meanings of old, and far past all our meanings of far, and gone past all our meanings of gone, long, long before the star that made it ever begins to fail. It will have circled the galaxy and drifted between its stars, and worn out even the frame of these numbers, and still the sun behind it will only be middle-aged, only halfway through its quiet life, its worst days not yet imagined. So that when the real ending finally comes for the sun, the ending we have been circling all this while, the machine is not merely absent from it. It is unthinkably, arithmetically, almost tenderly beyond it, so deep into a future the mind cannot enter that the death of an entire star, its own maker's star, is nothing to it but one more small light going quietly out, very far behind, in a sky already full of them. So let the machine go. Let it keep its silence and its impossible distance, drifting through a future the mind cannot walk into, and turn your attention now, softly, back toward the small warm thing it was born beside. Because we have been speaking of the sun's death as though it were the far wall of this whole story, the place where all the counting finally comes to rest. It is not the far wall. It is nearer than the machine's fate, and it is stranger than the machine's fate, and in one quiet way that almost no one is ever told, it is worse. Right now, above the roof over the room you are lying in, that star is burning the way it has burned since before there was anyone to watch it. It is steady. It is patient. From where you are, it seems like the one thing that will never change, the fixed point that every other thing is measured against, the reliable light you have never once had to think about. And for the whole length of a human life, for the whole length of every human life that has ever been lived, that has been true enough to build a world on. But a star is not a fixed point. A star is only a very slow fire, and a slow fire, however vast, however patient, is always, quietly, using up the thing it burns. Here is what most people are never told, because it is gentler and slower than the ending they picture. The sun does not wait billions of years to begin ending the world. It has, in a sense, already begun. Every star like ours grows slowly brighter as it ages, not all at once, not in any way a single lifetime could ever notice, but steadily, across spans of time that make our whole recorded history look like one held breath. And that slow brightening has a consequence, and the consequence arrives long, long before the sun itself is anywhere near dying. There is a narrow ring of warmth around any star, a band at just the right distance where water can rest on a surface as a liquid, and not freeze into stone, and not boil away into the dark. We are inside that ring. We have always been inside it. It is the whole reason there is a we at all. But the ring does not stay where it is. As the sun slowly brightens, that band of warmth drifts outward, away from the star, year by unhurried year. And one day, not in some sudden fire, but simply in the ordinary patient increase of an aging star's light, the warm ring slides past the Earth entirely and leaves it behind, on the hot inner edge, too close, too bright, too warm for water to stay. In about 1 billion years, as far as anyone can tell, the oceans begin to go, not drained, not frozen, boiled, slowly, up into the air and then away into space, as the rising light turns the whole blue planet into something that can no longer hold on to the very water it was made of. Rest on that number a moment, because it is easy to say and almost impossible to feel. 1 billion years. Think back to the machine's long journey, the one we have been following all this while. Remember that it needs 300 years only to reach the near edge of that great frozen shell of comets at the solar system's rim, and 30,000 years to drift the whole way through it and out the far side. 30,000 years. Longer than everything we would ordinarily dare to call history, and it is nothing next to this. You would have to run that entire 30,000-year crossing more than 30,000 times over, one after another, before the oceans had finished leaving. That is how distant the first death is. And it is the near one. So here is the strange, soft mercy folded into all of this. And here too is its quiet dread. The living world does not end in the dramatic fire we like to imagine. Long before the sun swells, long before it reaches out and swallows anything, the earth simply grows too warm, and loses its water to the sky, and goes still, the way a room goes still when the last person has left it and closed the door. Nothing announces it. No explosion, no roar, just a slow brightening, and a warm ring sliding outward, and a planet left standing on the wrong side of a line it never felt cross. And none of this, I want to say gently, is anything you need to carry out of tonight. You can let the number rest exactly where it is. You do not have to hold 1 billion years anywhere in your body. Let your shoulders come down from wherever they have quietly climbed. Let the breath lengthen and slow. These are only distances and only spans of time, and you are only here, in the dark, warm, safe, listening. And the ring of warmth is still precisely where it has always been, right around you. But the ocean's leaving is only the first act, and the star is not finished. It is only warming to its work. So keep the longer clock in your mind now, softly, the way you might keep one hand resting on something in the dark. Somewhere between 5 and 7 billion years from this present moment, far past the boiled and silent earth, the sun arrives at the real turning, the one this whole night has been slowly circling toward. Deep in its core, where the fire has burned steadily all this time, it finally runs out of the one thing it has always burned: hydrogen. The lightest, simplest fuel there is, the very stuff the star was mostly made of on the day it first lit. For billions upon billions of years, the core has been fusing that fuel into heavier ash, and for all of those billions of years, there has been enough. And then, one long slow age from now, in the deep still center of the sun, there is simply not enough anymore. And a star that runs out of fuel in its heart does not just dim and cool and gently fade away the way you might expect a fire to. It does something far stranger, something that runs almost backward against every instinct we have about dying things. It begins to grow. The core, no longer able to hold itself up with the outward push of its own fire, starts to settle inward and contract and heat, and that new heat catches the fuel in a thin shell wrapped around it, and the whole vast outer body of the star answers by swelling enormously outward in every direction at once. The sun begins to become a red giant, not smaller and hotter and fiercer as you might guess, but bloated and swollen and strangely cool across its surface. A great dull red thing, where the small steady yellow star used to hang. Picture that, if you can, gently, from a safe vantage no one will ever really stand at. The sun you have known your entire life, the one small enough to hide behind a thumb held up at arm's length, growing and growing, until it is not a bright coin in the sky at all, but a wall of deep red fire, spread across that sky from one edge to the other, close enough that it would seem you could reach out and lay a hand against it. It swells until it could fill the whole sky, if there were still anything left on the inner worlds with eyes to look up. And as it grows, it loosens. It casts off nearly half of everything it is made of, shedding its outer layers slowly into the surrounding dark, so that its own hold on the worlds around it begins to weaken and slip. The star grows huge and generous and terrible all at once, and it reaches outward, across the orbits of its nearest children, one small world at a time. The first to go is the smallest, and the nearest. There is a scorched little bead of a world that has always circled closest to the fire, the innermost of the sun's children, and when the star swells it is simply taken in, not shattered, not flung away, just quietly absorbed, folded into the outer edge of that vast red body, as though it had never been anything separate at all. Behind it, the next world in, the bright one, the one you have watched hang low in your own evening sky as a single steady lamp near the horizon, follows the same way. One scientist who has spent his working life studying the deaths of stars, a man named Dmitry Veras, has said that he is confident the sun will swallow both of those inner worlds. Mercury and Venus, gone into the fire that made them. He is confident too that it will not reach the small rust-coloured world further out, the fourth one, the one we call Mars. Mars most likely is spared. It sits far enough away that the wall of fire stops short of it, and it goes on turning, cold and thin-aired and untouched, a survivor by nothing more than distance. And between the two that are certainly lost, and the one that is likely saved, there is a world whose fate no one can quite settle. Ours. The third one. Your own. Here, if anywhere in this long night, is where a small hope wants to live. Because for a while the arithmetic seemed to leave a door open. As the sun sheds so much of itself, casting off nearly half of all its mass into the dark, its pull on everything around it grows weaker, and a weaker pull means the worlds it holds can drift a little further out, sliding gently away from the swelling star as its grip relaxes. And so there was a version of the story in which the Earth, feeling that loosening hold, backs away just quickly enough, retreats a step ahead of the fire, ends the age not as ash but as a scorched quiet stone, still tracing a wider, lonelier circle around a star it barely recognizes. Veras himself has called the Earth's fate the less clear one, the uncertain one, the one that could still fall on either side. But the newer work, the careful modelling done since, does not leave that door open very wide. As far as the calculations can tell, the Earth does not truly escape. Even if it is not swallowed whole, even if some worn cinder of it survives the encounter, it does not survive as anything you would know. It becomes an airless, blackened ember, its seas long gone, its sky long gone, its every soft thing long gone, a burnt husk circling a dying star. So let that hope be what it is, small and honest and brief. Not a rescue, just a technicality about how the ending arrives. Let it pass through you the way the rest of these numbers have, without asking anything of you, without needing you to decide. And there is something worth resting on in that loosening, that weakening of the star's hold, because it does not only touch the inner worlds, it reaches all the way out past the ringed giant and the tilted blue one, out to the farthest true planet, the deep cold one at the solar system's edge. That distant world circles now at roughly 30 times the distance between the Earth and the Sun. A span so wide that sunlight, which crosses from the Sun to your window in about 8 minutes, takes hours to reach it. And when the Sun sheds its mass and its grip goes slack, that far world is expected to drift outward too, its orbit swelling to something like 60 times the Earth's distance from the Sun, twice as far as it rides today. The whole architecture of the solar system, the neat nested rings you were shown as a child, does not hold its shape. It loosens, it spreads. Everything the star was holding close, it begins, slowly to let go. You may feel where this is leading, quietly, without my having to point at it. Because there is one small traveller out there that was never really being held at all. Not tightly. It was already loose, already leaving, already drifting outward on a line that no swelling and no shedding of mass will ever call back. The loosening grip that will one day let the outer worlds wander further is the same grip that has never been able to keep the little spacecraft. By the time the star reaches this point in its dying, that traveller is so unspeakably far away that the sun's growing, then shrinking, then slackening pull is little more than a rumour at its back. The catastrophe that swallows the inner worlds and scatters the outer ones is, from where the spacecraft drifts, a slow silent flare somewhere behind it in the dark, and nothing more. But we are not quite there yet. Stay with the star a moment longer, let it finish what it has started, because the swelling does not last. Nothing at this size can. A red giant is a star living beyond its means, burning through what is left of itself in a final extravagant spending, and after roughly 1 billion years of that, of filling the sky and reaching for its children and casting off its outer skin, the sun runs down. What it has been shedding all along, those loosened outer layers, drift away completely, expanding into a vast, faintly glowing shell of gas that spreads out into the surrounding space. A soft ring of light, thinning and cooling as it goes, the last exhalation of a star that spent 10,000 million years holding a small, warm world in the habitable dark. And at the centre of that fading shell, all that is left of the sun you have known your whole life is its bare, exhausted heart. That heart is a strange and terrible thing to try to picture from a warm bed. It is not large. All the fury and all the reach of the red giant collapses down to something no bigger across than the Earth itself. A single dense ember, mostly carbon and oxygen, packed so tightly that a small spoonful of it would weigh more than you could ever lift. A white dwarf, they call it, a star that no longer burns, that has no more fuel to spend, that only holds on to the heat it was born with and gives it off slowly into the night. It does not explode, it does not vanish, it simply begins the longest, quietest cooling there is, not over years, not over millions of years, but over trillions of them, dimming from white to yellow to a deep sullen red, and then, in theory, over spans of time so vast that the universe itself has not yet lived long enough to make one, fading toward cold and dark entirely. A black cinder where a star once was, something so far off that it is still only a word in our equations, a place we can point to but never watch arrive. And this is the star that built the record. This is the fire that warmed the room, where a committee once chose 115 pictures, and the sound of a kiss and a mother's first word to her child, and pressed them into gold, and sent them out. The sun that lit that whole small human effort, the launches and the calculations and the long nights of listening, will end as an Earth-sized ember cooling in the dark, wrapped for a while in the faint ring of its own discarded body, then bare, then dim, then almost nothing. The maker outlives the making by a while, and then the maker begins to go out. So we come to the edge of the real question now, the one the whole night has been walking toward. If the sun swells and swallows and sheds and shrinks to a cooling cinder, and the inner worlds are taken, and the outer worlds are let loose, and the Earth becomes a scorched and airless stone, then where, in all of that, is the small drifting thing we started with? Where is the spacecraft, and the record it carries, when its own star has finished dying? It is not on any of the worlds that burn. It is not in the shell of glowing gas. It is somewhere else entirely. Somewhere the fire never reaches. Somewhere the loosening grip long ago released. And to stand, gently at that vantage, to look back from wherever the traveller has drifted and see the star go quiet behind it, we have to let go of one last thing. We have to let go of the scale we have been using all along. So let go of it now, gently, the way you would set down something you have carried too long. All night we have been measuring. We have counted the miles and the years, the watts and the light hours, the swelling of a star and the slow shedding of its skin. We have built a scale in your mind, one rung at a time, and it has served us well, but it will not carry you the last step. The last step is simply too large for it. To see where the traveller is when its own star goes dark, You have to stop counting in the units of a single human life and begin counting in the units of a galaxy. Here is what that means. You already know that the little craft needs about 300 years to reach the near shore of the Oort cloud, that vast shell of frozen debris that wraps the sun far beyond the last of the planets. You already know it needs something closer to 30,000 years to drift all the way through that shell and out the far side, and only then to be, in any honest sense, free of the sun at all. 30,000 years. It felt enormous when we first laid it down, longer than all of recorded human history folded back on itself many times over. Hold that number in your hand once more, and then understand that against the death of the sun, it is almost nothing. It is a single breath drawn in the dark. Because the sun will not begin to die for another 5 to 7 billion years. Not thousands, not millions, billions, with all the empty zeros a drowsy mind can barely stack against one another. Set the two numbers side by side, and the smaller one simply disappears. The 30,000 years it takes Voyager to leave the Oort cloud is, against the life the sun has left, roughly what a single second is to a span of long centuries. So by the time the sun even begins to think of swelling, the spacecraft is not still working its patient way out of the solar system. It left long before. It cleared the Oort cloud while the Earth was still blue, while there were still oceans, while there was, perhaps, still someone standing here in the dark to wonder where it had gone. Then comes the stranger's star. Around the year 40,272, roughly 38,000 years from this very night, Voyager drifts within about 1 7/10 of a light year of a dim and unremarkable sun called a C+79, 3888, known also as Gliese 445, out in the direction of the Little Bear. Not a visit, not a destination, not a rendezvous anyone aimed for. Just the nearest the long drift happens to bring the craft to another star, close enough to notice, far too far to ever touch. And that past too, measured against the death of the sun, has already happened. It is buried in the deep past. By the time our own star runs its core dry, the memory of that flyby is itself unthinkably ancient, layered over by eon upon eon of further, quieter drifting. And then there is the galaxy, and the galaxy is what undoes the scale completely. The sun does not hang still in space. It carries its whole family of worlds in one slow, enormous circle around the center of the Milky Way, a single full turn taking about 230 million years. And Voyager, bound now to nothing, held by nothing but its own motion and the soft distributed pull of the galaxy as a whole, makes that same great circle in its own patient way. So do the arithmetic the night has been quietly building toward. 5 billion years at the least, divided into loops of 230 million years each. That is somewhere between 20 and 30 times around the galaxy. Not 20 steps down a road, 20 full circuits of 100 billion stars. So here, at the last, is the answer to the question the title of tonight asked you. Where will Voyager be when the sun dies? It will be nowhere near. It will be somewhere far out along the galaxy's slow-turning wheel, unknown thousands of light years perhaps, from the ember its makers once called home, having circled the heart of the Milky Way 20 times over, maybe more, since the last of its power drained away. It will be cold. It will be silent. It will have been silent for billions of years, its plutonium heart stilled since before even the first of those long loops was a quarter done. And still, it will be moving. Not toward anything, not away from anything, simply onward, at the very speed it has always kept. The same speed you were told at the beginning of tonight, carrying the same small disk of gold it carried up out of the sky above Florida on a September morning in 1977. That is the quiet gift at the center of all of this. The thing we built to last a handful of years, the thing whose voice we are switching off instrument by instrument even now in our own time, is going to outlive the star that lit the room it was built in. Not the sun's warmth, not the sun's light, Not the ground it was launched from, nor the ocean it was launched beside, nor any living eye that could ever have recognized it for what it was. All of that ends. The little craft does not. It keeps an appointment it never knew it had made, an appointment with distance itself, and it keeps that appointment faithfully, long after there is no one left anywhere to remember the appointment was ever set. This is the thing most people get wrong, if they ever pause to picture it at all. We imagine that when the signal fades, the story is over. We imagine the craft simply stopping, the way a wound-down toy stops, going still somewhere just past the edge of the map. But it does not stop. Losing its voice is not the same as losing its motion. The silence is only the moment we can no longer hear it. The journey goes on without us, exactly as it always would have, indifferent to whether anyone is still listening. Not an ending, a handing over. The traveller passes out of our knowing and into the plain, uncaring keeping of the galaxy, and the galaxy asks nothing of it and gives nothing back, and the drift continues all the same. And you do not have to hold any of that tightly. Let it be large. Let it stay out there where it belongs, turning slowly in a dark that has always been its home, and let your own shoulders come down now from wherever the sheer size of it lifted them. None of these numbers are yours to carry down into sleep. The galaxy will make its loops whether or not you remember how many. The record will keep its grooves whether or not you ever hear a single sound pressed into them. You are allowed, tonight, simply to have felt this once, to have let it move through you like weather, and then to let it pass on out into the same wide dark it describes. Let your breathing slow. Let the count go. It was never a thing to be kept, because perhaps that is the truer shape of the whole matter. Perhaps the arriving was never the point. Perhaps a machine that will never land anywhere, that carries no destination and quietly wants none, that will drift past star after star it can never see and mean nothing to any of them, is not a failed journey, but the purest journey our small and worried species has ever managed to begin. We are so used to journeys that end. We measure a life by its arrivals, its doorways reached, its distances closed, and here is one that closes nothing, reaches nowhere, and simply goes, and in going becomes larger than the star that flung it outward. Or perhaps it is stranger still than that. Perhaps the record was never really a message sent to anyone. Out there in the cold, some listener we half hope is waiting. Perhaps it was always a message pointed the other way, back toward us, back toward the small warm rooms it was made in. 1 billion years is written into the gold of that disk, engineered into the very depth of its grooves, so that it might still be playable long after the Earth itself is a charred and airless cinder. And the man who chose the sounds pressed into it, gathering the greetings and the music and the long soft montage of a living world, knew that. He said so plainly. He wrote that in the far future our sun, grown into a bloated red giant, would leave the Earth a burned-out stone, and that the little record would outlast the world that made it. He built a thing meant to survive the death of everything it remembered. So perhaps the true weight of it is not out among the stars at all, but here, in the fact of the making, that a creature small enough to fall asleep in the dark, frightened of its own brief span, still reached up and set loose a small golden voice, and told it to go, and to keep going, past the planets, past the shell of ice, past the reach of its own dying sun, and to speak, if it must speak to no one, then to speak to no one, patiently, for 1 billion years. Or perhaps, when you are this near to sleep, the difference between out there and in here, between the sender and the sent, between the star that dies and the small thing that outlives it, begins, softly to stop mattering at all. Perhaps someone finds it, perhaps some slow hand, on some world that has not yet formed, lifts the record from the cold and turns it, and hears a wail, and a heartbeat, and a woman saying hello in a language that died with its planet. Or perhaps no one ever does. Perhaps it simply turns and turns in the black, playing to the dust, the way a music box left open in an empty house still keeps its tune. And perhaps the word when has already loosened in your mouth by now, because out there, At that depth of time, there is no when. There is only after, and after that, and after that, with nothing left to mark one moment from the next. And perhaps that is the last strange comfort in all of this, that the question the night began with, where Voyager will be when the sun dies, has no clean answer and never needed one. It will be far, it will be silent, it will be somewhere in the dark between here and a nameless star, moving at the same speed it moves tonight, indifferent, intact, carrying its one gold message toward a listener who may never come. We can say that much, and no more, and the not knowing is not a failure. It is simply the honest edge of how far a small mind can see. You do not have to decide which of these is true. That is the quiet gift of a thing this large. It asks nothing of you. You will not be alive to see the sun swell, or the oceans lift into the sky as vapor, or the little probe slip past its stranger star. None of it is yours to carry. You can set it all down, here in the dark, the way you would set down a stone you had been holding without noticing. Let the numbers go. Let the billion years go. Let go even of the small ache that comes with them, the one that whispers that everything ends. It does. And you are allowed to rest anyway, because here is the shape of it. When you stand far enough back, a creature made of water and a few short decades looked up from a warm and doomed little world, and it did not despair. It built a golden voice and threw it upward, out past the planets, out past the wall of ice, and told it to keep singing long after the singer, and the song's whole meaning, and the star that lit the room where it was recorded, had all gone quiet. That is not a sad story. That is the bravest thing a small thing has ever done. The sun will die. It will take almost everything with it. And still, somewhere out beyond the ruin, in the direction of a faint star in Ophiuchus, a disk of gold will go on turning, carrying a laugh, a greeting, the sound of rain, patient and unafraid. So let this be the thought you drift out on. Not that the sun will end, though it will. Not that we are small, though we are. But that smallness reached up once, in the dark, and made something meant to outlast its own maker, and sent it gently on its way. That is the reason to feel wonder here, and not fear. On another night, we will follow another of these long, slow threads together, here on Gravity of Sleep. For now there is nothing more to know, and nothing more to hold. Let your breath go long. Let the room grow soft around you. Let the great slow wheel of it all keep turning without you for a while. Somewhere out there, past the dying light, the little record is still singing, and it does not need you to be awake to sing.